in now. We bring in Ryan Glasspiegel. He's one of the writers at OutKick. He's done a really good job writing for us over the past several months. Broke the news. I'll ask him exactly when it was. I feel like a month or so ago that ESPN was going to be embarking on the biggest layoffs in the company's history, laid off around 10% of their overall workforce. 300 people lost jobs, 200 open jobs not to be filled. Ryan, first of all, thanks for getting up with us. Second, when did you break that news?
Yeah, it was about a month ago. It was in the first week of October. So I believe it was about 4 weeks before they ultimately happened last week.
All right, so ESPN lays off 500 people. This is the third different significant layoff that ESPN has had in the last 3 or 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. And what does this tell us about what's going on at ESPN in particular, but also in the cable and satellite channel industry in general?
Yeah, to your point, it's the third round of layoffs since 2015. There were actually 2 rounds in 2017 of talent, so you can either count that as 3 or 4. But in any event, it's now totaled about 700 to 800 people between behind the scenes and talent. And then when you add the 200 jobs they're not filling, you get up to nearly 1,000 job losses from the company since 2015. And so I think what you can say is happening with ESPN is that they are focusing their energy on airing live sporting events. The bread and butter of their business model is airing games from the NFL, NBA, college football, and MLB, and I guess a little bit of college hoops as well, and then reselling those live rights either to a combination of advertisers and using it to monetize their subscription fees through the cable and satellite bundle. That's not to say that shows like SportsCenter and First Take and PTI aren't profitable, but I think that we're just seeing ESPN shed everything around its edges that isn't directly correlated to the monetization of live sporting events. And then the reason that they are fortifying is, as you've been talking about for a number of years, their main business, probably about 75% of their revenue, comes from the cable affiliate fees that I was talking about. And so they had over 100 million at the beginning of the decade, and now they're slightly over 80 million subscribers. They get about $10 per subscriber per month between ESPN and ESPN2. You add all that up, that means they're losing $200 million a month in revenue and over $2 billion per year from what they would have had if they hadn't been losing their subscribers. And so that means that they can less afford luxuries around their periphery.
It's well said, and let me just try to put a little bit of a bow on that analogy. We regularly on this show will go around the horn, and I'll ask the guys, hey, how many of you are cable and satellite subscribers? And if we had had that conversation in 2010, almost everybody on the show, certainly, but almost everybody out there listening to would have said, oh, I've got a cable or satellite subscription, because sports fans basically had to have it, right? And over the next, basically since 2012, which I believe is when the peak of ESPN's business, and also not coincidentally the cable business in general, happened at around 100 million subscribers. They've since lost 20 million subscribers. There was a CNBC report that by 2025, there may only be 50 million cable and satellite subscribers. So what is going to happen here? Because ultimately what is so fascinating about this is if you look at Disney's business, Disney Plus, like I'll give you an example, and I know you've got a young daughter, I believe it is, but I don't know what you watch in your regular household yet, whether you watch Disney Plus. But last night, my wife was watching with the boys The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. Disney Plus is all Disney-owned content. That's what they bought from Fox, The Simpsons, everything else. They have a massive collection of owned original content, which will be able to be watched forever. So if my kids right now decide that they want to watch Peter Pan this morning, if I can figure out how to work Disney Plus, I'm getting to be the old dad who doesn't have any idea how anything in the house works technologically. In theory, I could put that on for them. 101 Dalmatians, the old Disney animated movies that everybody out there remembers watching, Cinderella, even up to the Aladdins, which are kind of getting old now, and all the way up to the Frozens, right? Like all of the Disney animation movies have new value for each new child. Your daughter, I think it's a daughter, will probably be interested in those like you were when you were a kid, like your grandchildren will one day, like my grandchildren will. The point is, it's owned content that will never cease to have some value. Sports is the exact opposite of that. Because sports only matters primarily. The WWE may be making a little bit of an argument for the importance of having an entire roster of old videos and old matches. My kids enjoy watching a lot of those old matches on the WWE network. But by and large, there isn't a huge demand for old sporting events. And even if there were, they aren't retained by the ESPNs of the world typically. They're owned by the leagues, which they then have to release as a part, release, meaning have to lease them back in order to be able to use them. So the point of all this is ESPN does not really fit what Disney is trying to do with their company. What's the future there?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, Clay. And so you have a part-time job at Fox on the Fox Bet Live show. And
that's right.
A couple years ago, Fox had to make a decision with the Fox Sports RSNs, which combined to air the regional rights for about half of the NBA, NHL, and MLB games. So
that's
if
right.
you're in St. Louis, like you get the Cardinals games there. And those were and still are enormously profitable businesses. But because of what we've been talking about with the cable industry, they're in structural decline. And so when you're in a public company, the stock market values you based on your growth potential. And it becomes like a very fascinating dilemma when you have these business units and ESPN, like those Fox Sports RSNs, even with the amount of subscribers they've lost, it's a wildly profitable business. So you have a unit of the business that's making profits and generating cash. But Disney's stock is rising and falling based on Disney Plus subscribers.
That's right.
Disney Plus isn't yet a profitable entity. So how long is it worth it for ESPN to generate the money that you use to reinvest in Disney Plus when it, as a fact that it's a declining business unit, it is detracting from your share price? And that's a question I don't know the answer to. There have been some pretty prominent investors online. Rich Greenfield, who is definitely not a Disney shareholder, I think he's been on your show, so some of your listeners may be aware of his opinions. He has been kind of negative about Disney prospects for a number of years. Eric Jackson is a hedge fund manager in Canada. He used to have a CNBC contributor job. He is a Disney shareholder, and he's been arguing that Disney should divest from ABC and ESPN. The question I don't know the answer to about whether that makes sense for the direction of their business is how much do they promote their movies and Disney World and cruises, et cetera, on these properties like the NBA Finals and Monday Night Football as kind of a synergy to use one arm of the business to promote the other? What is the kind of synergistic value that they get from that? And I don't know the answer to that, but I've definitely heard the argument that you're talking about, that for shareholder value, it would be in Disney's best interest to sell or spin off ESPN and ABC.
Yeah, look, and the argument there is basically rent versus own, if you have to distill it into three words. They own all of those movies now, right? The Pixar family, the Marvel family, the Star Wars universe, all of those are properties that made complete sense to own because they'll own them forever, right? And The Mandalorian is super popular on ESPN Plus right now. As I mentioned, my own family is watching it. And that can continue to be a new franchise, and maybe down the line they'll start to put some of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in directly to to Disney Plus, which is what I think they're doing. They rent sports. And so to me, and I've made this argument before, and I think you've read them, and I think we've talked about it on OutKick, if I'm Disney and I want to be in the sports business, I can see trying to buy the UFC. I could see buying WWE. I could see owning an entire league, because then you control everything surrounding it, and it kind of fits what the Disney mode of business is. But right now, this renting of sports doesn't make a lot of sense, and I know there's an ESPN value associated with it, but there's, other than the 30 for 30s and maybe Peyton's World or whatever the heck they call it, there's not very much original content that must be seen. And look, I'm on a television show. Daily sports television is disposable. It's great for that day, and the same thing, by the way, is true of daily sports radio. We talk about the current stories that are out there, but 2 weeks from now, most people aren't going back and ever watching anything about sports because it's been, either proven to be correct, wrong, or you're on to something else. It's very much like a meal, right? Like you eat it, and it might be satisfying, but in that moment, but there isn't any real long-term value to that, as opposed to, if you invest in a stock, you got some long-term value with it. Anyway, it's kind of fascinating. So
yeah, no, that all makes sense. I guess the question is, and this won't be a long answer, but how do the bundles evolve? You said earlier that CNBC had executives who forecasted that it could go down to 50 million cable subscribers.
What is the floor is the question that's massively important there. Like, how far are we falling from 80 million?
And, what's the floor is a question, but it's also what new bundles emerge. Is there a value proposition where you combine the library content with Disney Plus with the, you can't miss live sports? So that's
what they're trying to put together, right? Because right now, I believe, you may know better than me because I don't make the decisions on what we buy in my house, but I think the Disney bundle right now is Hulu, Disney Plus, and ESPN Plus all rolled together, right? Isn't that a bundle that Disney offers?
It is. So I think that this maybe kind of re-evolves into 3 or 4 different bundles. And then the question is, what's the incremental value if live sports are in that Disney Plus bundle? Because right now, the bundle that you mentioned doesn't include Monday Night Football or NBA or SEC football. If they put SEC football on Disney Plus, how many incremental subscribers can they drive by doing that? And that's something we're not going to know the answer to until we see how the new bundles shake out.
It's also important they don't have the right to do that contractually. So the eyeballs that are still available on television are so much more substantial than what you can get streaming-wise in terms of audience. So the SEC, the NBA, they might sell a specific universe of rights only. I think like the English Premier League may have done it. Some of soccer you can only get. Some small conferences you can only get on ESPN Plus. But right now that's a pale approximation of the distribution you get and the attention you get to be still on cable. It's a fascinating question. Here's the big question. When does this start to impact what athletes make and the overall value of sports franchises? Because right now, you can argue, for people out there who may not realize, and we're talking with Ryan Glasspiegel, he's one of the writers at OutKick, does a good job and broke the news about the ESPN layoffs. Right now, you can argue that a big part of every athlete's salary is predicated on these regional sports networks that you talked about, on the big national cable deals that the NBA, Major League Baseball, whoever the leagues are getting. But those dollars are theoretically bound to decline as the number of subscribers that are paying for them also decline. And in order to replicate those dollars, you have 2 options. Either one, you charge a lot more, right, for the people who are hardcore to be able to watch their favorite sport and the dollars remain the same. Or you find a way to get the bundles so big that you're able to keep the cost low, which has been the business model so far, that maybe there's not going to be as rapid of a decline as is forecast. And so if you can continue to increase cost over the next decade or so, and the number of subscribers doesn't decline precipitously, you can still end up around the same dollars. How do you think this is going to shake out?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is when sports rights fees go down. And there was a Sports Illustrated cover in, I think, the mid-1980s.
Yeah, they've been arguing about it for a while.
Have reached a peak, and it's a bubble. They're going to go down. And we frankly haven't seen that happen yet. I can't remember a time where a major league signed an extension that wasn't for an increase.
I think the English Premier League. I think the English Premier League did it in England in the most recent extension that they did in England. I think you're correct. It is not, and it's happened for small conference, right? In the in America, I think the American Athletic Conference got less money than they had before. I think it's, and if I'm wrong about that, I apologize to the American Athletic Conference, but there are a few small conferences that have gone to the market and the dollars haven't been as substantial as they anticipated, less than what they made last time.
Yeah, so I mean, the most recent barometer we've had, SEC got a gigantic rights increase on their Game of the Week package, which, as you wrote for years, was the most dramatically undervalued live rights anywhere in America. So that wasn't a big surprise. But what it was a little bit of a bigger surprise, Clay, was that MLB, which their regional viewership is very strong, but their national viewership has been declining for years and years and years. And they got increases from Fox for the World Series and TBS for really what amounts to just a package that has about 2 playoff series and nothing really else that important. And so they went up. The NFL is definitely going to go up with their rights deals that they sign in the ensuing future. We're going to get our first real test with these NBA rights that are up in about 5 or 6 years because they've been declining in viewership. But last time there was a third bidder in Fox that wanted to get in with Turner and ESPN, and ESPN and Turner decided that they were going to pay a lot of money to keep those rights from officially coming to market. But I think in 5 or 6 years with the NBA, and I still think the NBA is even going to go up, even with some of the viewership issues that you've spoken a lot about. But that's going to be our first real test because then we're starting to be out in that range where CNBC said there could only be 50 million cable subscribers.
Yeah, and one of the big questions there is now a distinction, ironically enough. It's like we're going back in time. Being on broadcast television is less of a issue for sports because the broadcast television is free, and a big part of the Disney deal with with the Disney ESPN deal with the SEC was they want to make sure that at least one of their games of the week, and I think it's going to be more than that, are available for everybody in the nation on ABC because it helps substantially with brand building. They've loved what CBS has been able to do in terms of putting their game in the biggest possible spotlight. So there is a value here, and this is a question that some of the ESPNs of the world are going to have to start answering with the leagues. As the viewership, for instance, with the NBA declines precipitously in the playoffs, does the NBA want to be on ABC more, even though they may make less? Does the NFL want Monday Night Football back on broadcast television? This is all really fascinating. It's really like a kind of three-dimensional chess, and it's hard to figure out exactly what direction things are going.
Oh, for sure. But to be fair, broadcast, their reach has started to decline a little bit over the last couple years as well. It hasn't been as precipitous as cable. And the other thing is that it's not like ESPN, if they move Monday Night Football from ESPN to ABC, they have a big question of how they make up the money that they use Monday Night Football to drive their cable subscription fee with. So it to your point, all of these decisions are going to be fascinating, and we're really just scratching the surface of how the distribution mechanisms really dramatically change.
There's no doubt. He's Ryan Glasspiegel. You can follow him on Twitter at Sports Report. You can read him at OutKick.com every day. I appreciate the time, my man.
Thanks, Clay. Talk soon.
Oh, wait. I got one more question for you. I just said you were done.
Okay.
Wisconsin. You are a Wisconsin alum. You are a huge Wisconsin Badger fan. What happens with Wisconsin going forward?
This is really fascinating because we don't know who's playing against Michigan. We knew that 15 players tested positive. The only names that have come out are the quarterback Graham Mertz, who's eligible to return by technicality because he tested positive 21 days before the Michigan game. But then the 14 other players, the only identity who we know is the backup quarterback, Chase Wolf. And so we have no idea how many of those players that are going to be out for Michigan because they fall outside the 21-day window are starters versus end of the bench reserve guys. It's a total mystery. The program has completely kept the identity of the players who tested positive under wraps. And so it's really I don't even know what team we're going to see, and I can't even begin to make a prediction on it.